I'm Rob Finnerty. Rush Limbaugh was the voice of American conservatism for a generation, leading opposition, reshaping both the media and politics probably forever. To talk more about his life and legacy, we want to bring in a man that knew him professionally. The president of Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist, is joining us this morning. And the independent man, the host of the John DePetro Show, conservative radio host John DePetro. Welcome into Wake Up America. Pleasure to have you both on. John, I'd like to start with you. This is a blow for conservative America, but without what Rush Limbaugh did, do we have the Fox News of the world? Do we have Newsmax? Do we have 4,000 talk radio stations? When he started back in the late 80s, there were 150 nationwide. Now there's over 4,000.
That's right, Rob. And you know what's interesting was Rush picked up the mantle when Ronald Reagan left office. And I was fortunate. Right after I got out of college, I moved to New York, got a job with ABC, had a chance to work with Rush, get to know him. I was even there, for some of the early days when he had the television show. And somewhere, maybe in my parents' house, I have a photo of me and Rush and Roger Ailes backstage. But he was, first and foremost, not only was he a visionary, but Rob, he was the same way on the air as off the air. He was just a little more reserved. But when that light went on, he was just like a lightning bolt coming out of the microphone. And Rush was very routine. Each morning he'd get in about 8:30 in the morning, very casual. And he would always do, and he taught me, you do an hour of prep for each hour that you're on the air. And he had his staff. He had a great staff, no turnover. Kathleen Gleason. He also had for several other people. Johnny Donovan, who was the big voice of WABC.
Right.
Rush knew how he was going to frame the 3 hours, and it was must listen to radio, and it really changed politics and media in the country.
Grover, I know that you knew him. He had his critics, certainly, critics on the left, critics in the center. But there was a way, I remember listening to him in my car, especially when I was in college. He would poke fun at Democrats, think Bill Clinton, Ted Kennedy, John Kerry. But he did it in it was almost tastefully done. It was totally unique to Rush Limbaugh.
He entertained as well as informed. Sometimes conservatives think that they jump up and say something shocking that's true, that everybody's supposed to rally to the flag and understand what they meant. Rush made American conservatism understandable. He made it clear. He made it fun. He made it part of your life. It was not, now you're going to sit down and I'm going to lecture you and you're going to be bored, but you really need to know this stuff.
Right.
He and his critics, he was on for 3 days, three hours a day for decades. And when you hear his critics complain about this, that, or the other thing, really, with all of that, the only criticisms they can come up with are this kind of weak ones they had. Sometimes the left also didn't understand that he had a sense of humor, or because they don't, unfortunately.
I agree.
And from time to time, he'd call and want to make sure he understood something exactly correctly. He really put work into making sure he got things right, so that he was correctly informing people on what was going on. And before Rush, there was the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the three networks, and they all agreed on everything. Yep. And it was difficult for people to get an alternative understanding of what was happening. Rush made that possible himself through local radio talk shows who learned that trade by watching and listening to Rush, and other spin-offs. So he changed the world.
You could make this argument, John, but for my money, he's the best ever to do it. And we're talking 80 plus years of radio history in this country. There were these things, and I can remember seeing my grandfather. Years ago, you wouldn't listen to talk radio while you were, painting in your house or doing something in your garage. But there were these things called rush rooms. People would, if you worked in a big city, you'd go to a place where they had it on full blast in the 90s, and people would all listen, waiting. People would park their cars in their driveways when they got home and wait for a segment to end. And, we do that now with podcasts a little bit, but it was Rush Limbaugh that was the first.
It was, Rob. That's an excellent point. And they had to do that because coming in for lunch. But he also spoke to the real people, the people all over the country, right? The people, he said, forget about New York and LA and DC. And he took calls from Kansas and Iowa and Idaho, and they loved him. and he understood that. Just two quick things. One time, I was brand new to New York, and I actually had the privilege. I had dinner with him on the Upper West Side at Ernie's,
Wow.
75th and Broadway, and it was incredible, Rob, to watch. His life was just taking off. He wasn't bragging, but that day he was flipping through the mail, and he had a $1 million check from Random House, his publisher. Now think of that. He wasn't in a bragging way.
Happens to me all the time.
He used to love. He used to hang out. His place was the Post House, 63rd in Lexington, Upper East Side, because he lived beautiful across from Central Park, right near the museum. And I used to go in there sometimes just because I knew he'd be in there holding court. Big cigar, big steak dinners. Guys like Newt Gingrich would come in, Pat Buchanan. But he understood the significance of it. Grover just said something really significant. And Rob, when I was going to then venture off and be a full-time host, and Rush was so generous with his time and encouragement, but he said, John DePetro, get out some notes, and I wrote them down. And one of the things, I still have this, that he talked about was, you have to back up everything you say, and intellectually you have to be able to defend everything. And that's what people underestimated. He just didn't go out and you just spew for 3 hours. He would speak to a lot of different people, legal experts, scholars, different things like that. His arguments, as Grover will tell you, they were sound arguments.
Yeah. Grover, he was he really loved this country. John just brought up, his love for the Midwest. He was a Missouri guy until the end, born and raised just outside Kansas City. He loved this country. He was a big supporter, for obvious reasons, of the First Amendment. And it's a shame that his voice is no longer with us, especially right now. But as we head into this new era of cancel culture and conservative repression and silencing conservative voices, what do you think Rush how do you think Rush would have handled that moving forward?
By being Rush, he broke that. They wanted to cancel him. They tried to go after his advertisers. They tried to say that, to do the cancel culture stuff on them. The left wasn't strong enough to make it stick, but they really did try and go after Rush just by being good at what he did, by backing up his presentations with facts and getting it accurate and getting it well put together and being entertaining and having an audience. The best way to beat cancel culture is to have your own audience.
Right.
The left has yet to create a left of center Rush Limbaugh that Al Franken and others tried. They failed miserably. The left hasn't been able to come up with someone like Rush who plays that role. And I'm not sure that they're ever going to be able to.
Yeah, it's fascinating you bring that up. I wasn't going to mention this, but the top five talk radio hosts in America are all conservative. There's not a liberal among them. And you're right. He used facts. John, I always enjoy listening to you. Grover Nordquist, such a pleasure having you on. John DePetro, we could talk for a long time about Rush Limbaugh. He was an original, but I enjoyed